I'd like to do a quick review of the rules of the road. They're very important to know both for safety on the water as well as getting your Coast Guard license. I'm going to run through these fairly quickly. I suggest you follow along with your booklet on rules of the road. If you are getting lost here, please put it on pause until you can catch up, or go back to the other PowerPoint presentations that you can self-paste. Again, this is just a quick overview of them to give you a little bit of a flair for what I do in the classroom. Rules are made up of international and inland rules. Sometimes they're separate, sometimes they're combined. The ones that are in red are mainly the international only rules. The key thing in looking at the rules is don't think of small boats, you got to think of big boats. You got to put yourself in a boat 100 foot long, 100 tons, because small boats can do many things that simply the rules weren't designed for. Again, to successfully deal with the rules, you got to put yourself in a 100-ton, 100-foot vessel. Purpose of the rules. Let me say it time and time again. Purpose of the rules is to avoid collision. Collision with other vessels, collisions with objects. The purpose of the rules is to avoid collisions. The rules are, again, international inland rules. They're separated by what is called a coal regs demarcation line. This is found at the mouth of rivers and harbors on the oceans. You're not going to find this in inland waters. And it's designated by a line on the charts. You look on your charts, you're going to see the coal regs line. One side will be international rules. The other side will be inland rules. International rules, again, were formed in 1972 by called the coal regs. A bunch of people signed on to it. Inland rules basically replaced a lot of the old rules that were many different sources of them. Again, they consolidated it into one set of rules. There are 38 rules plus 5 annexes. We're just going to look at one of the annexes. The other ones are basically technical explanation of lights, sounds, and fishing. During our rules, again, we're going to focus on international and inland, where they're combined, and note the differences with only international rules only. The best way to look at this is we're going to group them. First 3 rules, general definitions. The next ones want to apply at any time. Basically, when the boat is away from the dock, you're underway, these rules apply. It's like starting up a car and putting it in gear. These rules apply. The next ones are when I can see you. If I can see you with my eyes, these rules apply. If I cannot, again, I want to emphasize, if I cannot see you, these rules do not apply. It's an important point. 19 is our only rule dealing with restricted visibility. 20 to 31, lights and shapes. 32 to 37, again, lights and signals, sound signals, light signals. 38 is exceptions. And then we have our annexes. Just to give you some idea of measurements, because we talk in meters, not in feet. The big divisions are at 7 meters, which is 23 feet, 12 meters, 20 meters, 50 meters, and 100 meters. Those are the main divisions where the rules will change. Again, international rules apply to all vessels upon the high seas and in all waters connected therein, navigable by seagoing vessels. Basically, it says if that boat can get into inland waters such as Green Bay and is compliant with international rules, it's considered being compliant with other rules. Our rules, again, are compliant with Canadian rules, provided there is no conflict. So if you're going to go in Canadian waters, as long as you don't conflict with any of their rules, you're in compliant. Rule 1, basically the Navy can come up with their own rules published in the Federal Register related to warships or fishing vessels. Again, they're put in the Federal Registers. The Secretary of Homeland Security can make changes related to lights and sound shapes. So if they have a vessel that's designed to not quite be in compliant, the Secretary of Homeland Security can grant an exception. And again, this will be a particular certification of alteration, is what they'll call it. Okay, so number 1, we have basic inland international rules. Secretary of the Navy and Homeland Security can make changes as needed. Number 2, I consider the most important rule. Nothing in these rules shall exonerate any vessel, the owner, master, or crew from the consequences of any neglect to comply with these rules, or the neglect of any precaution required by ordinary practice of seafarers. Again, if it's common sense, other people aren't doing it, you do it, something happens, you're negligent. Special circumstances, again, is where we have more than two boats coming together because the right-of-ways don't work that well. Most of them are designed for two boats meeting. Again, very powerful. And again, the point here is you got to follow the rules plus common sense. Is this person negligent? You have to ask the question. A, were they simply not watching what they were doing and grounded the vessel? Or B, were they taking an action to avoid a collision resulting in a grounding? If they were taking actions to avoid danger, no, they probably are not negligent. If they weren't watching what they're doing, they probably are. Again, a lot has to do with circumstances. Now we're talking about compliant with these rules in any special circumstances, including limitation of the vessels. We talked about special circumstances where you have two or more than two vessels involved in a risk. Very important point. You may depart from the rules necessary to avoid immediate danger. That was just what we're talking in the slide before. You depart from the rules to avoid an accident. Again, you do what you can to avoid an accident, and we, again, follow common sense. Okay, there's a couple of general definitions we want to hit on, and these are important because they define everything else within the rules. A vessel, if it floats, it's a boat. If it's used for transportation. If it's a house, the Supreme Court recently says that houses that float away are not boats and can't be regulated as boats. But if it's designed as any vessel as a means of transportation on the water, it's a boat. Power-driven, propelled by machinery. Sailing vessels, if it has machinery, it is not being used. To be a sailing vessel, you must be using sails only. If you're using sails and motor, you're power-driven. Key point, keep it in mind. Restricted maneuverability for fishing vessels, so if you get lines, trawls, nets, whatever, and you're engaged in fishing, at that point in time, you're considered a fishing vessel. Again, it has special privileges. But trolling with lines is not. Seaplane, plane lands on the water. Vessel not under command, it's broke. Due to special circumstances, it cannot maneuver to comply with the rules. Jammed rudder, busted hydraulics, electrical system failures. The host of reasons why a boat can't comply, they're considered not under command. Vessels restricted in her ability to maneuver. The key part is by the nature of her work. These are work boats. They're out there doing things on the water, dredging and the like, and they cannot maneuver out of your way. Therefore, they have special privileges. Dredging, surveying, underwater operations, divers down. Transferring cargoes, provisions underway. Obviously, in this slide here, they're doing refueling. They're not going to get out of your way. They're restricted. Aircraft carriers, mine clearing operations, markers, anything that restricts their mobility while they're doing work, they have this classification. Vessels in sight of one another when they can be seen visually, not radar, not any other means, ARP and the like, AIS. When I can see with my eyes, then I consider to be in sight of one another. Restricted, anything that prevents me from seeing you but does not include nighttime. Darkness is not restricted visibility. It can still see your boat lights. Underway, not anchored, made fast to the shore, moored, or aground. So when we're underway and we're floating free, many of these rules apply. Anchored, moored, or aground means we can't maneuver. No one's home. Western rivers basically flows into the Mississippi River. Great Lakes and its contributaries, pretty much common sense. Inland waters, basically anything inside the boundary line. There is a boundary line defined by 46 CFR, I think it's 7, that tells you when you're in near coastal waters or inland waters. It makes a difference on your license. It makes a difference on requirements. Constrained by draft, international only. It's a power-driven vessel. Because of her draft, she must stay in the channel, cannot deviate. Obviously, this oil tankers, just that. It's got to stay within the channel. Wing and ground, planes that fly right along the surface, we do not see many of those around here. They're considered a power-driven vessel. So that's the first three rules. Again, they're designed to define things to give us a template of where we're going. The next rules apply in any conditions of visibility or when we're underway. So when the lines leave the boat and we're floating free, doesn't mean we're making way. We're underway. So we're floating free. These rules apply. Daylight, night, doesn't different time. The very most important one, I think, is lookout shall at all times be maintained by sight and hearing to appraise the situation, what's happening, and determine if there is a risk of collision. So by sight and sound, to look around, see what's happening in conditions, determine if there's a risk of collision. Key items, sight and hearing, at all times, not just occasionally, but at all times. Full appraisal of situations, determine if the circumstances will result in a risk of collision. Questions I ask, if you're out charter guy or teaching sailing, you're working with a student, who's your lookout? You have to have one at all times. Radar, again, is not our appropriate means. It has to be visual. Again, a little bit of a statistic. This one's a little bit old, but it's pretty much staying there. Over 1,000 incidences where there was no proper lookout, 78 deaths. Proper lookout at all time, classic case, no one, not even hands on the wheel, no proper lookout. This is why there's accidents. Here's an example one out in Philadelphia where a boat got run over by a tug. Operator did not maintain proper lookout, lower wheelhouse, limited visibility, distracted, and ended up in having 2 people get killed. Very important, lookout at all times. Safe speed. Just like on a highway, on the water, we have to maintain proper speed to do 2 things. To take proper and effective actions to avoid a collision and stop within the distance appropriate to the prevailing circumstances and conditions. Obviously, if you're out there on a beautiful day, no one's out on the water, you can go as fast as you want. However, in the same beautiful day, if there's a lot of other boats out there, a lot of other situations, you've got to go only as fast as you can so where you can still avoid an accident or stop within those conditions. That's the key, is what are the conditions dictate safe speed. These include visibility, traffic density, maneuverability. Remember, we're in a 100-foot boat. Background lights, big cities, lights, we can't tell a boat light from a buoy light from a stoplight. State of the wind, sea, and current. How bad is the conditions out there? Navigational hazards, depth relative to the depth of the water. Again, the key ones you're going to run into is visibility, traffic density, maneuverability, state of the wind, sea, and currents. Those are really the big ones. Can you avoid an accident or stop within those conditions? If not, then you're going too fast. No different than on land. Next one we have is to appraise if there's a risk of collision. Remember, the rules are to avoid a collision. If there's any doubt, if there's a risk of collision, we shall assume so and act accordingly, whatever that may be. If we have radar, like in this case here, we have radar, we have a long scan, we see a target, it's been coming down on one of the electronic bearing lines, the range has been decreasing, however, it's still, the bearing's been constant. So the key thing here is we can plot or do equivalent systematic observations. If we have radar, you need to use it. If it's on boat, you're required, recreational or commercial. Assumptions shall not be made based on scanty information. Basically, you got to have a pretty good idea what's going on. The key part for most of us, the risk shall deem to exist if the compass bearing of an approaching vessel does not appreciably change. Meaning if the compass bearing does not change, but the range is decreasing, they're coming towards us, they're getting closer, risk of collision exists. Here's just an example of that. If the bearing does not change and the range is not decreasing, they're going parallel to us. If the bearing does not change and the range is increasing, they're going away from us. So again, this is how we determine if there's a risk of collision. Again, such risks that sometimes exist even if appropriate to large vessels. So large vessels, towing vessels, At close range, there still may be a risk of collision, but the key thing is decreasing range, constant bearing. You got a very good chance of risk of collision. Real late, so what do? We have a risk of collision. Whatever action we take is going to be positive, ample time, means early, and with due regards to good seamanship. We don't do anything dumb out there. Any alteration of course of speed to avoid shall be large and apparent to other vessels to observe visually or on radar. Don't have them guessing. Small changes should be avoided because they can't tell you what actions you're really taking. Large and apparent, so there's no question what actions you're going to be taking, are taking. And again, big and enough that others can see it. If there's enough sea room, basically, or there's enough room around us where there's not other boats, altering of course alone may be the most effective way to avoid a close quarter situation, provided it's made early enough, is large enough, and does not result in close quarter situations to another vessel. Again, we want to have a situation where we're avoiding a risk of collision with one boat, but yet putting us in a risk of collision with another. So we have to kind of keep track of all the vessels in the area to make sure that we don't get into a bad situation. Carefully check until the other vessel is passed and clear. We've taken our actions. We just don't want to ignore it then. We want to follow through, just like on a highway. If necessary to avoid a collision or allow more time, we can slacken our speed. I don't suggest taking all the way off because if you have no water over the rudder, you have no steering abilities. But the idea, if we need more time to assess the situation or take an action, slow down. The time to assess, normally you can't go wrong by slowing down. Again, if you stop totally, you have no control of the vessel. Rule 9, in the United States, we stay on the right side of the channel where it's safe and practical. Basically, we're staying to our starboard side. So you stay to the starboard side of the channel or fairway to the point where it's safe. You do not go down the middle or on the port side unless there's other circumstances. If we're on the Western Rivers, Great Lakes, power driven, and we're proceeding downbound with a following current. So power driven in one of these particular areas, downbound with a following current, we have the right of way over any upbound vessel. Not any other downbound, but any upbound vessel. We shall propose a place and manner of passage, and we shall let the upbound vessel know that by appropriate signals, or in many cases now we do it by radio. So again, a downbound vessel following current has the right of way over an upbound vessel. In fact, by rule, this is the only vessel that's defined as having a right of way. The key thing here is a downbound must let the upbound boat know how and place the passage, initiate the signals, so that the upbound boat can hold position to let you safely pass. Again, there's the current's flowing down. These boats don't stop. The upbound vessel against the current shall hold as necessary to permit safe passage. Again, you're not going to stop these boats downbound. There's just not enough power there with the current to make that happen. Several other things in small vessels and relate to large vessels and open channels. A vessel less than 20 meters in length or a sailing vessel shall not impede the passage. A vessel that can only safely navigate in a narrow channel or fairway. So if you have a boat that's got to stay in a channel or fairway, a small boat less than 20 meters or sailing vessel shall not impede that passage. And in this example, you shouldn't be bouncing your small sailboat off the side of an ore carrier. Also, you should not be fishing. In this case, we're referring to commercial and recreational fishing both. Shall not impede the passage of vessel within a narrow channel. You cannot anchor or fish in areas that you're going to impede those boats' passages. Also, you should not cross in any way to impede their passage. And finally, in all cases, you should be anchoring a narrow channel to impede the passage of any vessels. So we have downbound on a designated water with a following current, power driven. We have the right of way over any upbound vessels provided we indicate the place and manner of passage, initiate the signal. Smaller boats, 20 meters or less, sailboats are not going to impede the passage of a vessel. They can only stay within the channel. Basically, too, our small boats are not going to impede the passage of any vessels. They got to stay in the channel by crossing, fishing, or anchoring. Okay. Here's a case where we had a situation. This is in Australia. A race going on. Small sailboat going right in front of one of the bigger boats. Got run over. This was the small boat's fault because they, again, got in front of another boat that they should not have impeded the passage. Okay, a couple faults, a couple signals. If a vessel is nearing a narrow bend or an area where other vessels cannot see you, you are obligated to sound a prolonged blast. That prolonged blast will let people know that you're there. This one happens to be a sailing vessel that's leaving, going around an obstruction. She's going to sound a prolonged to let people know that she's there. In return, if you hear that, you're going to sound it. Now, because we're on 100-ton vessels, 100-foot vessels, normally we do not stay in traffic separation lanes. These are highways that are out on the water. They're used to manage large boats. They have buoys and charts outlined on them. And again, normally we're not in those areas. In fact, we're not supposed to be in those areas. If we're going to use a traffic SEP zone, we're a big enough boat to need it. We proceed in the direction of flow for that lane. Keep clear of the separation zone, just like on a 4-lane highway. Stay out of the middle part. Join, leave at terminations, which are basically our interchanges, just like on the highway. Join at the smallest angle to the traffic flow. It's kind of like our on-ramps, again, off our highways. Avoid crossing into them. If we have to cross one of these areas, we call into the traffic control center, let them know, get their permission, and we cross at right angles to the traffic flow to get through as quickly as possible. And again, we don't anchor or fish in the separation areas as well. Just like you don't park a truck or car in a 4-lane highway medium strip. Vessels that shouldn't use them, again, avoid by wide margin, cross at a 90-degree angle, call in, don't impede any other traffic. Okay, this is our first 10 rules. It gives you a quick overview of them. Go back through your manual and the other PowerPoints to get a feel for them so you make sure you have an understanding of the key points. Best luck.